When you sit down to watch a movie like Shortcuts, you might need a snack. You'll probably need a few beverages too. You're also going to have to stop the film a time or two for restroom breaks because you've enjoyed a few beverages. We did. So why not make at least one of those drinks a mug of coffee? And if you're going to do that, there's only one choice, and that is Sparkplug Coffee. They've got the freshest, fairly traded premium Arabica beans in all of Canada. You can get half calf or decaf if you prefer either of those types of hot drinks. They've got a wealth of blends and roasts, including rotating seasonal blends. So if you've had the winter type for long enough now that we're almost in July, switch it up and look for something in the summer catalog. The characters in Shortcuts live in California, but that doesn't mean they're shut out of getting some Sparkplug delivered to them. Canadians get their shipments for free within a week, but Americans will also get what they order in a week or less. They just don't get free shipping like, for instance, Bev and I do. But listen, be a member. That gets you perks and deals that some, maybe I'll buy some once type person doesn't get. Membership will also save you money on every single order. Plus you can brag about being in the club. And this is so not a Coffee of the Month club. And hey, if you need to pause or even cancel your membership because you're juggling all the hot women you're sleeping with, no trouble. So when you're ready, go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. You will save 20% off your next order by using our HYES promo code. Okay, the proper review is going to start in seconds, so loosen up your vocal cords, Bev. I asked the same about Andrew Luther, although in his case, it's music playing fingers that need to loosen up.
And action. Have you ever seen
Shortcuts? Hello, movie fans, and thanks for flicking the button that allows you to hear the 520th episode of Have You Ever Seen? We review motion picture classics every Monday, and every other Friday for that matter, and spoil the plot from the beginning all the way to the end. I'm the short and sometimes short-tempered man who would never leave the family dog by the side of the road, Ryan Ellis. And here's the lady who doesn't work as a phone sex operator anymore because she was too good at it, and I just couldn't take it anymore. My wife, Bev.
That's me.
That leads perfectly into the coming attractions trivia because there's a running theme in this film, which I'd forgotten. We haven't seen Shortcuts in quite a few years, but we have seen it together. Probably when I first met you, maybe? Or maybe 4 or 5 years in. Anyway, so the coming attractions trivia for Shortcuts. And this requires a spoiler alert for The Player, Robert Altman's previous film, and also a little bit for Shortcuts, but we've already established that we're going to spoil that. But a spoiler for The Player first. Okay, this is probably common knowledge anyway. Tim Robbins was a killer in Robert Altman's previous movie, The Player, which came out the year before Shortcuts did. What a run that was. Robbins is in this movie too, but who turns out to be a killer in Shortcuts? Is it Robbins or someone else?
So I think the answer you're looking for is that it's Jerry, Chris Penn's character, because he kills the young woman that they meet in the park out of nowhere right before the earthquake hits. But you could add Doreen to that list because she does ultimately kill that little boy with her car.
I didn't think of it that way, but you're right.
And Zoe kills herself.
True. Wasn't thinking of that either. I'm thinking about a murderer. Those are accidental.
An intentional murderer. Because if there's one thing that's a mystery to me in this movie, it's his actions at the end.
Yeah, why he kills Nancy, he's just going nuts, I guess. He can't take the fact his wife does all these things on the phone for guys, including maybe for Bill, Robert Downey Jr.'s character. There's speculation that he's one of the people she talked to.
Oh.
Which isn't crossing a line, but it's a little bit strange if he knows that she was the one talking to him. And then they go to bed, and I don't want to do that now with you. And Penn always seemed like he was on the edge. Look at him in Reservoir Dogs the year before this.
Everyone in this movie is on the edge.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But he does kill Nancy at the end, the young girl that he and Bill just met, along with the other girl, too. And that's apparently blamed on falling rocks because of the earthquake.
Even though there's witnesses that include her friend.
Right, and Bill. But another thing that's going on here is the floater, his doing. He's referred to, or there's a scene with him, right before all, or at least most mentions of the corpse. That has got to be deliberate. Now, I read online, there's speculation that Penn is the one who killed the girl that ends up in the water where the fishermen find. And they leave the body for 3 days so they can fish. She was also raped. Now, this seems to track with this guy. Raping is a little bit much, maybe.
So they're saying he's the killer.
Of that girl. And then also Nancy at the end. So 2 people in the same movie.
So he's like a serial killer.
Maybe so.
Oh, that is such an interesting theory.
And you know another thing that's really fascinating about this? If Penn did do it, not so much the one at the end, because that was out in the open. That's not the desert, but there's no water. But he's a pool cleaner, right?
Yeah.
So he's always dealing with water. And that girl was found in the water.
That does feel like a tangible connection.
And because I knew that supposedly he's the one that killed her, I was watching. And yes, he is mentioned or shown often around the time the corpse is mentioned or shown.
Ah, I love that theory.
Altman did an incredible job linking everything in this movie. Maybe a few flaws here and there, but I thought it was great in that way. Okay, Shortcuts was released by Fine Line Features nearly 30 years ago in early October 1993. It was a critical success, but not a financial one. But Bev, the movie's 30 years old in a few months, so please remind us what it's about and give us a skinny on Shortcuts. This might take a while.
This might take a while. Brace yourself. This might be the longest skinny I've ever written. All right, guys. Lily Tomlin and Tom Waits are Doreen and Earl, a working-class couple who are perpetually fighting. On her way home from her job at a diner, Doreen accidentally hits a kid with her car. That kid's parents, Anne and Howard, played by Andie MacDowell and Bruce Davison, take him to the hospital where he goes from bad to worse. There, they're joined by Bruce's estranged father, Paul, played by Jack Lemmon. Meanwhile, their baker is incensed when they fail to pick up their son's birthday cake and calls to harass them as their son is dying in the hospital. Anne and Howard's sad news hits their next-door neighbor Zoe very hard and pushes her over the edge into taking her own life in her garage where she's discovered by her nightclub singer mother, Tess. Both of these neighbors employ the services of pool guy Jerry, played by Chris Penn, who's unhappily married to Jennifer Jason Leigh's saxophone operator, Lois. Jerry and Lois are friends with Honey and Bill, played by Lily Taylor and Robert Downey Jr., who are getting too comfortable in their house-sitting arrangement. Tim Robbins and Madeline Stowe are Jean and Sherry. Jean is a highway patrolman who's cheating on Sherry with Frances McDormand's Betty, much to the chagrin of Betty's ex-husband, Stormy, played by Peter Gallagher, who responds by destroying her house. Julianne Moore and Matthew Modine are Sherry's sister Marion and her husband Ralph. They get in a huge fight where Marion admits to infidelity right before their new friends come over for dinner. Their new friends are Ann Archer and Fred Ward as Claire and Stuart. They're also fighting because Claire just discovered that Stuart and his buddies decided to wait a whole weekend to report finding the corpse of a young murder victim so that it wouldn't interfere with their fishing trip. Then, an earthquake.
You forgot the medflies in the beginning, too.
This is one of those movies that I feel like I need to watch a dozen times, and each time I'll understand something a little bit more. But the medflies felt like a bit of a mystery to me. It's an interesting concept, and I think it raises the tension right from the jump, because basically they're poisoning the entire city.
To kill medflies.
To kill these medflies, which I guess are an invasive species that they're having problems with. So then they're spraying pesticide everywhere. There's disagreement amongst the characters of whether or not it's poisonous or whether it's safe, but you just never know. Can you trust the government? Can you not? It's 1993, and this is Los Angeles. I bet a lot of people were not feeling particularly trustworthy of the government.
And then something happens at the end that no one can control. An earthquake.
Yes.
And that's going to come up in the movie I cover on Friday, Superman. Earthquake, Superman. Well, first of all, let me do the nutshell. We can get back to the medflies and everything else. So, Shortcuts in a nutshell. Fishermen find floater. Fuck. Forget it. It's incredibly inconvenient to tell those that explore evidence easily, so stop stressing. And I can't think of something better. I go with alliteration. Okay, I said the critical response was good, and the Rotten Tomatoes numbers certainly are. 95% of critics on that site liked this film. 7.8 out of 10 is the average, though, so that's a little low, considering it's 95% of them actually liked it. Maybe someone just said, it's good, but not great. I don't agree. It is great. And 88% of audiences. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars, while Gene Siskel had it number 2 on his top 10 that year. I think they both had Schindler's List number 1. Ebert didn't rank it, but obviously with 4 stars, it was somewhere in the mix for him in his top 10 as well. Pauline Kael would have loved this because she was a huge Altman fan, and she almost always gave him good reviews, certainly on the major movies. She would just crow about them so much. But she retired, so she didn't write a review of this, but I'm guessing she liked it. The film was 134th at the box office in 1993. Jurassic Park was number 1. Sleepless in Seattle, we covered that last week, was number 5. And Groundhog Day was number 13. This film was nominated for only 1 Oscar. Robert Altman was up for Best Director, but Spielberg won that year. We've covered a few other movies that got a nomination for just the director and absolutely nothing else, which is very unusual. But it happened for David Lynch twice, Blue Velvet and Mulholland Drive, and Marty Scorsese was up for The Last Temptation of Christ. So in the span of about, 15 or so years, it happened 4 times. Maybe there's more. I think it's just those 4, though.
So unusual.
There may be others way back in the past. I didn't look for this, but just in that stretch, 86 to 2001, and twice Lynch, once Altman.
I can see how
Scorsese.
The cast is simply too big to pinpoint one actor, although you might think that Jack Lemmon could have gotten a...
I love how he's cast against type. As a heel. Yeah. As a philandering, I don't care about my son heel.
This movie came out before Glengarry Glen Ross, right?
No, a year after.
So people had seen him being a loser. Somebody...
The inspiration for Gil.
Yes, yeah.
In The Simpsons.
Like an unlikable character that you don't want to root for.
I think you root for him in that movie anyway, though. For a while, at least.
Yeah, that's fair. Whereas in this movie, no, he's a real piece of work.
Other than Penny might be the worst person. Well, I guess Robbins, too, and for that matter, what Stormy's doing with it. Okay, he's on the list.
Okay, let's make a list of how awful is everybody.
One of the reviews...
Worst to least worst.
Rita Kempley didn't like this movie. I was looking at Wikipedia before we sat down, and she, I think, gave it a negative review, flat out. I think I saw that she said it was sexist. Do you think it is?
I think it portrays sexism.
Yes. Altman did that in MASH. And I think he was being sexist, and the characters are.
MASH is less self-aware.
Yep.
I think that MASH
23 years earlier,
thinks
too.
the bullshit they put Hot Lips through is funny. It was a different time and place.
But then 5 years later in Nashville, some of the best roles in the entire movie are for the women, including Lily Tomlin.
Nashville's a movie that understands what's hard about being a woman. I feel like it knows its female characters, and this could be from years of collaboration. He got older, he probably grew as a person, he worked with these great actresses who maybe showed him a thing or two. Recently, we watched Dr. T and the Women.
Yeah, within the last year or two.
Which is not a good movie. One of Altman's worst, probably. And it is a remarkably sexist movie. I remember saying when the movie ended, I'm like, did he just get divorced or something? It felt like a movie that hated women. This doesn't feel like a movie that hates women. It feels like a movie, actually, that sees women.
It feels like a very human movie.
Very much.
Most of these people have problems that you can relate to.
Have you ever read Raymond Carver? The movie is based on a bunch of Raymond Carver short stories and a poem.
Yeah.
While he used Carver stories for the source material, he really went out on his own.
And Carver's stories didn't necessarily link characters like this does.
No, they didn't link characters, and apparently the only stories he really stuck that true to were the ones about the body in the water and the little boy who dies in the car wreck and the baker.
Well, two of the big running themes, so that makes sense.
Yeah, pretty big, well-illustrated stories. But I wonder if that comes from Carver's writing, that he just understands people. Although, as I say that, I think Altman understands people.
Yes.
He really has this great touch for authenticity.
One of the most memorable things in this entire movie is a woman doing it, Jennifer Jason Leigh, doing phone sex while changing her baby's diaper, putting other kids to bed. It gets graphic, but it's not entirely, oh, baby, fuck me, fuck me, fuck me. I think she says stuff like that here and there.
But it's like stuff like, put your fingers in my ass. It's stuff that's vulgar.
And the baby won't understand yet, but the young tyke, and soon the young tyke definitely is going to understand.
She's definitely pushing the boundary of what she can get away with saying in front of her kids.
But I love how it's so matter-of-fact. She gets to work from home, which so many people have been able to do the last 3 or so years. And it makes sense that she would, but she's truly living at home. This is not in some office or some room off by herself. She's just living normally with her little kids, and that's part of what drives Penn crazy. Whenever he watches her do this, the camera shows him seeming like he's about to boil over.
He's a cuck before we had the word cuck.
And yet, she's helping them get by because pool cleaning doesn't pay that well in the early 90s.
Oh, I bet that phone sex operating is far more lucrative, but wouldn't that make him feel like more of a cuck? It's sex work. However she feels about it, even if she finds it like a workaday bore, it is sex work, and it is probably out-earning him several times over.
Because she can do this all the time. You see her doing it during the day, you see her doing it at night. The running theme of people being nude, the women obviously, I don't think you see any guys with their Johnsons, but the floater, of course, is nude. Julianne Moore, one of the more famous scenes in the whole film, where she's nude bottomless because she spilled white wine on her white outfit.
Yeah.
I gotta take it off. But she's bottom nude, which Madeline Stowe didn't want to do. Stowe ends up being top nude. I don't know if she ever did nudity before this movie. I'm not sure if she did or not. But Moore apparently told Altman, I'll do that scene, and I got a bonus for you. You'll find that I'm a natural redhead.
And we all found it.
Yeah. And somebody, old Lori Singer, gets naked in the movie, too. So what do you think about that, first of all? I don't think that's sexist.
Is it titillating? Yeah. If you're going to show only female nudity and no
only
male nudity.
Stowe is remotely titillating. Moore and Modine are in the middle of a fight, and I love this, and I know you do too, that he gets to be, I forgot about this because I haven't seen this movie with you in quite a long time.
He's in the Fredo position.
3 times now movies have done this. The first was Giant, the second was The Godfather Part 2, and the third is Shortcuts. Almost 20 years apart each time too. Rock Hudson, when he's arguing with Dennis Hopper in Giant, never gets up. Probably because Rock Hudson would tower over Dennis Hopper, so it's more effective to do it that way. But it also makes him feel impotent when he's angry, but seated. Fredo, one of my favorite scenes ever in any movie, is in Godfather 2 when, it ain't what I wanted! In this chair that bounces up and down as well in the boathouse, but not getting up. Michael standing, very calm. Fredo screaming at him, but completely, almost laid out, in fact, not just sitting down. And now Modine yelling at Moore, not constantly, but a few times he raises his voice, but never gets up. And she's bottomless on the other side of the room.
Yeah. In this movie, it's true, nudity's really used in a sense, for power. I wouldn't say that about Zoe going skinny dipping. It's like a curious moment where you learn about Jerry because he's being a peeping Tom about the whole thing. Maybe that's an expression of her freedom, that she feels comfortable enough that she'll just take her clothes off and go swimming, not worry about it. But in the case of both Marion and Sherry, the two sisters, Julia Moore and Madeline Stowe, their nudity is powerful. When Madeline Stowe is nude and Marion's husband comes in and is like, why are you...
She doesn't cover up.
She doesn't cover up. She's not ashamed at all.
It's her brother-in-law.
And he's so uncomfortable, and she is enjoying it. Her husband is a dirtbag. He's clearly cheating on her. He's a pathological liar. He's a completely useless idiot. Mm-hmm. But she kind of gets off on laughing in his face every time he tries to get one over on her. She's just like, you're a joke, and she loves it. She doesn't have much respect, I don't think, for her brother-in-law either. No. And she gets off a little bit on leaving her tits out and letting him be uncomfortable. And then Marion...
Oh, did we say, by the way, that Julianne Moore is painting her? That's why she's topless.
Sure, yeah. That's a good reason to be nude, but then you lock the door, you warn him, you do something. You cover up. Oh, he saw me naked. Okay, but as soon as possible, you cover yourself up. She doesn't even try. It's so bold. It's not titillating. And then the argument, my God, the power of being bottomless rather than topless. But I think, especially in the 90s, bottomless nudity was incredibly rare. That was like an X-rated film.
Isn't it rare now?
It's still pretty rare, but less maybe. You're probably more likely to see a dick in a movie or TV show right now than you are to see a woman bottomless. And then the fact that she's acting like there's nothing unusual about it when he's upset about it. Why aren't you wearing any panties? You didn't have to take your skirt off. It was white wine. Mm-hmm. You could get changed. There are options. It's not going to stain. There's no urgency. So it feels like a power move.
And the irony, too, although she doesn't know this is going to happen at the time, but they all dress up like clowns because Ann Archer, I guess, brought the makeup in her car. Maybe it's always in her car, and the wigs and everything, and some costumes. So Marion is not in that outfit very long anyway. She's in a different and then they're in the hot tub. Now, do you think this movie's saying that they played around, the four of them?
I feel like if the movie was saying that, they would show it. You know, you have these two couples that are in incredible amounts of tension. They've had a potentially marriage-ending fight before.
Both of them did, yeah. The two women paint the other guys' faces, though, too. I think maybe in movie language that might say something right there.
I think they're all just getting drunk enough
and not eating food.
Oh, that's right.
Modine burns the fish.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they just really need to blow off steam. Like everybody in this movie, they really need to blow off steam. And they do it by drinking too much, by partying, by not letting the party end. Who has an impromptu dinner party with new friends? It goes all night like that.
Till dawn, yeah.
Such an unusual thing. These are middle-aged people. This is a very strange way to behave. But, of course, none of them really want to be alone with their spouse.
Yeah.
So nobody wants the party to end. Nobody wants the drinks to stop being poured until the tension is cut, I guess, by the earthquake. But we never really learn what happens. Do you think these marriages work out? I don't know.
Well, because we find out that Marion cheated, and that's why he's yelling at her. And Stuart told Claire about the body in the river. She's
troubled by his
She goes to the funeral. The only person in this movie that we care about, I think, that goes to that funeral. Because no one else knows this girl. Well, maybe Chris Penn did. Maybe Jerry did. But she goes because she feels guilty on behalf of her husband, who also is the only one of the three of them, Huey Lewis and Buck Henry, that felt guilty during that weekend.
It was pure pressure that made him make that decision.
Yeah. He would have done the right thing, but he was letting them pressure him out of it. He's the only one who's even thinking about doing the right thing.
They weren't troubled by it at all.
And he doesn't need to tell his wife, but I think he does need to tell his wife to unburden himself.
Yes.
And that's why they get in the fight.
Yeah, I totally
agree.
Plus,
she's also supporting him because he's not working right now. And I don't know how much a party clown makes, but she's got to work pretty hard. And Robbins hits on her, too.
When he pulls her over. And she's in clown makeup.
Gets her phone number.
Yeah. So most of the characters in this movie are married couples. Zoe and Tess are single, the mother-daughter. They have their own little kind of dyad, but I wouldn't say that it's marriage-esque. Yeah,
Zoe kills herself partly because her mom's an alcoholic and not a good mother. But they're both musicians. A lot of people in this movie are musicians who are actually actors. Huey Lewis is one of them. Tom Waits, of course, is a musician, too. And Laurie Singer, I think, legit played cello. I don't think she's faking that. Yeah, she played the
cello. And the woman who played the singer...
Annie Ross.
Annie Ross, yeah. She was a musician as well. She was a professional singer as well. So you have all these stories that involve couples who've been together for a long enough time to hit that stride where they're really themselves around one another. I think in a way the movie's about that familiarity that you rarely see captured in film, when people let their guard down around somebody that they live with so much that you have no choice but to let your guard down around them, and then you just get so used to it. The nudity is part of that too. fighting with him bottomless and refusing to acknowledge it. I'm sure you and I have had some crazy conversations on the nude before, right?
Probably, yeah.
We don't think about it. If one of us is nude, it's not going to stop me from talking to you about anything. I don't think it would stop me from fighting with you if I really had something that... No, exactly. And we have lived together for over a decade. That familiarity and the bottomless scene is the best example in the movie of that. But it does extend to every couple, you know, the way Doreen and Earl, Lily Tomlin and Tom Waits, they have the same fight over and over. We said Lois works her phone sex job in front of Jerry, and it's just so matter of fact. And the way that Sherry just laughs in the face of Jean's blustering attempts to bully her and lie to her, and she still has sex with him. Oh, really interesting. Well, they try to.
They don't finish.
A really interesting detail is when the two sisters are talking, and she's like, "What's Jean like in bed?" And she says something like, "Well, it doesn't last very long," very much implying they have an unsatisfying love life.
He's not doing oral.
Right,
probably.
right. But then she is the one initiating sex with him, and you see this passion between them that she's definitely not expressing when she's talking to her sister. She's lying to her sister and letting her sister believe that the sex is boring.
Even boring sex is necessary sex when you're a married woman or a married man who's not getting it very often.
I guess so. I kind of got the impression that she would rather have her sister believe that her husband's a dud in bed than whatever their dynamic is. There's something about it that she gets off on. He doesn't deserve sex. He's a terrible husband.
Well, Frances McDormand is a good-looking lady, especially in this era, for sure, back in '93.
She's a wonderful lady.
She's such a stupid lady. But Madeleine Stowe was a 15 out of 10 in 1992,
Truly,
1993. Unlawful Entry as well, so beautiful in
Mm-hmm.
that. Still looked great in 12 Monkeys. We covered that a few years ago. And he's stepping out on her. Of course, that's the old story. No matter how hot she is or how hot he is, somebody somewhere is tired of fucking her. But it's just interesting to see that Tim Robbins has a chance to be with anybody else. Not that Tim Robbins is a bad-looking guy, but he's also this dorky cop. He talks about being out on a case. I can't talk about my work. Like he's a detective. He's just, I think, a CHIPS cop.
He's like a highway patrolman.
He's punching John.
And he's such a loser. He's funny, but he's also kind of sinister because he does bad things. He's obviously a bad dad. He
also, when you're 6'4",
if there's one thing you're going to do that's going to turn the audience against your character, it is hurt an animal.
Or betray an animal in this case.
Yeah. The image of a dog following you while you speed away on a motorcycle, that is just going to break every single person. And that dog is cute.
Huey Lewis's family ends up with the dog, and they love him.
And they take the dog away from this kid who loves the dog.
Partly because he's wearing a cop uniform. You feel like, I can't argue with the cop.
Let's talk right now about his relationship with L.A. in the 1990s.
You mean Altman?
Not Altman. I think the purpose of putting a character who's a corrupt,
you mean Robbins,
shitty cop in a movie about L.A. that is this filled with tension in 1993.
Right, yeah.
When did the riots happen? 91?
I think they were before this, yeah. 91,
well,
92.
Yeah.
Rodney King was 91. I think the riots maybe
The riots were 92. That's right. That tension that he's illustrating is so palpable. Everyone in America must have been feeling it in the early 90s, but especially people in Los Angeles. And you're going to put a character in here that's a cop, and you're going to make him one of the worst characters in the film, aside from the murderer. Yeah. You're going to make him corrupt. You're going to make him vile.
There's a reason why my trivia question was all about Chris Penn, but also Tim Robbins was mentioned in that question because you're right. He's probably the second worst character in the whole film.
Yeah, in both movies, he's playing a real piece of shit.
Yeah. We haven't done Robbins that often over the years. Shawshank, of course. The Player, we did that last year. Bull Durham, we did many years ago. He worked with Altman, I think, just these two times. If he did again, I can't think of it. You'd think he would have worked with them again. They do some kind of interview, I think, about this movie on the Criterion DVD, which is how we saw the movie. It looked pretty good, I think. Didn't look awesome, but it was pretty good. I'm pretty sure that's where I heard Altman say, the last great movie I saw was City of God. And I remember thinking that was really recent when he said that. Oh, that just came out a year or so ago when he said that. So it must have been the 10-year anniversary DVD or something. And these two seem like they get along so well, and yet, or got along so well. I'm a little bit surprised they didn't work together again. And Altman did work with Downey at least one other time in The Gingerbread Man. Moore was in Cookie's Fortune. And I could probably look through the entire cast. I don't know if Lemmon worked with them again either, but he was dead in 2000, and Altman was dead in 2006, I think it was, when he died. So Robbins is pretty convincing in this movie, but he has one of the... Actually, I can't say a small role. I think this movie, one of the great things about it is it's so balanced.
Truly an ensemble. There's some characters, you don't see much of, say, Robert Downey Jr. He doesn't get as much screen time as Robbins.
Lily Taylor might have the least of everybody in the movie.
Yeah.
Lily Taylor... I love that Lily Taylor is playing Lily Tomlin's daughter. I assumed Tom Waits was her dad, but you said during the screening it was her stepdad, and then you also were wondering if maybe something had gone on.
When we first discover that the two Lilies are mother and daughter, she's complaining to her mom, "Why are you still with him? He is such an idiot." And he's an idiot. He's a terrible husband. He's a drunk and he treats her like shit. So what are you doing with this guy? And they're kind of having this argument. He's your dad. He's not my dad. And she makes a reference to something. You know what he did. Something to that effect. And then Lily Tomlin's answer is, "Are we going to tell that story every time for the rest of our lives?" And you're like, what story? She's having a conversation with someone else later, and they're talking about sexual assault, and somebody says, "Oh, someone assaulted this little girl when she was 4 years old." And Lily Taylor's response is, "That's terrible to do that to a girl who's only 8. That's the part where I'm like, oh, I wasn't imagining it. Something happened, but why would she mix up the ages so dramatically? Because it happened to her when she was 8.
Right, okay. And that's a great illustration we've seen in a lot of movies, and it happens in reality so often, where it's not the mother that's the villain here, but they'll cover up for the father or the stepfather or the boyfriend who did these things.
And her argument is, "I like his company. Who else would hang out with me?" That's her whole argument.
Except
and
the
it's like
fishermen,
a weakness.
they're just being leches, but they are hitting on her, which Tom Waits sees.
And then he gets mad at her.
Yeah.
Because like
She's
her
wearing a
skirt is too short or whatever.
Maybe all 3 of those guys are married, and it probably doesn't mean anything, but even just to joke like that, and you can say, "That's terrible, they did that to her," but they're showing interest at all in this woman, which means she's not undateable. She could find somebody else, I guess, is maybe partly why that scene is there.
Yeah, she doesn't believe she can. I think Tom Waits at some point is like, "Look at your face. You'll never find somebody else." But of course she could. She doesn't need this guy. I'm going to use this scene, like their relationship and that theory that he maybe assaulted his stepdaughter, as an example of how elegant the script is. And I know that there's a lot of improv that took place as well.
Typical for Altman.
Right. But he has such a gift for dropping these little breadcrumbs of information and never dwelling on them and never spelling them out. And playing out a scene like that feels like a very natural conversation, but still has information for you to think about. It doesn't spoon feed you. And it makes the movie that much more interesting. 3 hours running time, and I often joke that no movie should be 3 hours long. I hate any movie that overstays its welcome. But when this movie ends, I'm sorry that it's over. It feels so compelling.
Could have been a miniseries.
Yes! I felt like I could just watch it for days. There's like a tension throughout it. And I think I said this when we covered Nomadland. A movie that on its face should have been incredibly boring because there's really not that much that happens. But part of how you make a movie like that really interesting and compelling to the viewer is you make the viewer work really hard to figure out what's going on. So you don't spell it out. You have to pay attention to figure out what people's relationships are and what those relationships are like and what's happening with the plot, what the connections are.
Famously, Altman has the overlapping dialogue.
Yes, so you have to pay really close attention.
Doesn't seem like it's as often in this movie as it is in some of the other ones, like the early ones.
There's
Nashville
a few scenes
for sure,
where it's pretty bad.
The Player for sure, yeah.
A lot of directors do it. Few do it this well. I think probably the director that does it the best is Spielberg. Spielberg is incredible at copying. He admits he copied this from Altman, the style of overlapping dialogue, because that's how people talk.
Well, he does it so well in Jaws. I always love that scene in the beginning when Scheider's on the phone finding out about Chrissy, the first victim. If you look at Scheider, you can hear what he's saying more so. But if you look at in the background his wife and the son talking about the son hurt his hand on the swings, you can hear them better. Altman must have been doing the overlapping dialogue around, because he did it in Cave with Mrs. Miller, and the sound mix wasn't as good as it became later on. It's great in Nashville, and there's so many scenes where people are in a restaurant all together or a nightclub or something like that, and then it depends on who you turn the mic up on to hear that.
Didn't they invent a technique to do it in Nashville? Yeah.
Maybe not Nashville specifically, but it was Altman that was involved in the 24 track or something like that. So a lot of people are mic'd. Gosford Park does it really well. That's one of his better movies as well. And so you're right, you have to pay attention to any of his movies, but this one in particular. I do feel like the ending leaves a little bit to be desired. Jerry's just a flat-out killer, unprovoked. Why is he doing this exactly? Except the last time we saw him, I think, was when he got mad that Lois didn't want to talk dirty with him. And he seemed more perturbed right then than he had been in the whole film. So if he already killed somebody, it's brewing in him to do it again. Why he would do it in the broad daylight with people watching him,
That's the part to me that's the hardest to wrap my head around.
But maybe it's the cynic in Altman that this guy's going to get away with that because the news report's saying she was killed by a rock. Now, why Downey and the other girl would go with that story, especially the other girl, I don't know.
Especially the friend, yeah.
So that leads me, what happens next? Well, is he going to kill again? Because he probably is.
Sure, he got away with it. Is that really going to release that tension in him beyond the nonsense of him doing that in broad daylight where he could get caught? Does he want to kill himself? Because that's such a self-destructive thing to do, to kill somebody in a way that you're 100% going to get caught. If she was rude to him, if she was unreceptive to his advances, then you'd be like, okay, that's the last straw. He truly snapped.
Yes, right.
But she's actually coming around to him.
She wants the beer.
First, she's standoffish, and then she's like, you know what? Give me that beer. And then she sprays beer all over herself by accident because it's shaken up. And she's like, let me just take my shirt off to clean it. Just like Julianne Moore, who's just very quick to take clothes off because innocuous fluid got on it. She's quick to take her top off because she's worried about beer getting on it.
And these two guys are going over there to hit on these girls, too.
Yeah, so you're getting somewhere with this girl. Why all of a sudden are you compelled to kill her? Do you get it? Do you feel me where I say that is the one moment that's not earned, and for that moment of anything else in this movie to be unearned is troubling? And the first time I saw it, it didn't spoil it for me, but I remember being really bothered by that I was like, I just don't understand why he would do. I understand why he would be compelled to kill, but in that moment and in that way, I didn't get it.
From Altman's point of view, there are two reasons why it, at least, if not works, I can understand why he would do it this way. One is, he's the one that said it, and I've quoted it lots of times in this podcast, stories don't end, they just stop. We're stopping here. So there's that, right? So it's an unsatisfying ending, but I bet you could find other examples of an unsatisfying ending.
But it's not
in
that
his films.
It's because the movie ends there.
I feel a little disappointed the movie ends like that. That's why I'm saying. But that's an Altman thing.
I mean, like a lot of the stories are left pretty open-ended.
Yes, but I also do like the notion, I think that's exactly why he's doing this, that it sounds like Jerry will get away with it.
Yes.
So if he wasn't going to get away with it, then it would be a bad ending, I think.
I just thought of something with Jerry's character. He's invisible. Nobody sees him. He's cleaning the pool, and people are talking to him.
American Psycho.
Yes.
Nobody believes Christian Bale when he says, I killed all these people. That's funny.
He's the pool guy, right? They treat him like he's a piece of furniture. They talk to him. He says, I can't help you. Oh, yes, you can. Nobody listens to him. Nobody takes him seriously.
He's got to call them Mr. and Mrs.
Yeah, and they disregard him. His wife doesn't see him at all. Not exactly a big call for help, but he definitely is a man who's trying to get her attention, who's trying to get through to her, trying to connect with her, and she won't even look at him.
Yeah, even when she's not working, you're right.
And he has this friend who at least notices him, but Robert Downey Jr.'s character is kind of a dirtbag. Right in front of their wives and Jerry and his wife's kids, they're going to chase after these young women who are young. They look late teens, early 20s.
It's a family picnic, but let's go hit on these girls.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Bill's idea.
He's this person who's invisible, so of course nobody notices him killing her. Of course nobody thinks that he could have been capable of it.
Then too.
Because he's just this person who blends in with the background and nobody even notices him.
His lawyer's going to laugh at him like Christian Bale's lawyer laughed at him in American Psycho.
Yeah.
I think Downey and Taylor, more so Downey actually, because Taylor does have the connection with Tomlin. I wouldn't say wasted, but Downey was getting to be quite a name at this point.
But wasn't he also a total train wreck at this point?
Well, I don't know if we knew that publicly. He was in Chaplin.
Not that far from when he was getting arrested.
Well, it could be, but he was in Chaplin the year before, so he was nominated going into this movie, so that means he had to be one of the more recognizable names. Julianne Moore was building her credits, and Matthew Modine had been known for a while, and Lemmon obviously was a huge name. Andy McDowell, same year as this, does Groundhog Day. Ann Archer was in both of the Jack Ryan sequels, I believe, but she had been at Fatal Attraction not that long before and got nominated for it. And Robbins, of course, had done so many things, including Bull Durham, and Shawshank was after this. But certainly the biggest name in this entire cast now is Robert Downey Jr. He's one of the biggest names, I guess you could say, ever at this point because of the Marvel stuff. And we've only ever covered him once before. Can you guess what that movie would be?
It was Iron Man.
That's right. The one movie we ever covered 5 years ago was Iron Man. And here his character is, I wouldn't say unimportant, but one of the least important people in the whole movie. He's a makeup artist, I think an assistant makeup artist. He's not the one in charge, I don't think. But he has that scene with Taylor where he's making her up to look like she's been beat up, taking pictures, and then a scene that doesn't need to be in the movie, but it's another way you can just jam these people together. Crash was not a good movie to you and to a lot of people. Obviously it was to others because it won Best Picture.
It's not a good movie, period.
Okay, but one of the things that Paul Haggis is going for is the notion that we're all crashing into each other. That's certainly what happens in Altman's movies. I think it's so interesting that Crash won the Oscar the year that Altman made his last movie, and I think also died, 2006, but definitely made his last movie, because he was the master of these movies with the characters that intertwine. And this may be the best example, even more than Nashville, I think, in a way, because they're all in Nashville for a purpose. Either people live there and they're working, like Ned Beatty, Lily Tomlin, and whatnot, or they're making music, or what have you, and they're there for the festival, and then supposedly for that political guy, the presidential candidate, to have a big speech he never gives. So I love Nashville. I'm not saying it's not an incredible movie intertwining all these characters, but there's a reason they're all there. In Shortcuts, they are basically in the same area, just like Magnolia. Magnolia is a street, I believe, in L.A., and I think they're all supposed to be either on that street or in that area, at least. That's why the movie's called that. That's what I read years ago. And PTA does it well, too, and he was a big follower of Altman, big worshiper, friend of his at some point in his life as well. But intertwining all these characters, but making all this stuff work so well, Taylor and Tomlin have that connection, but if it wasn't for that, then Downey would be relatively unimportant, I would think, in this whole storyline. Oh, the thing I was going to say about the pictures then is that the pictures get swapped by the photomat person, I guess.
Yeah.
So the pictures of the floater that Huey Lewis took are swapped with the pictures that Downey took of just makeup, but it looks like he's beating on his wife, and they both look at each other like, that's bad. They get each other's
really cute moment.
License plate. They know each other's license plate.
Right.
So anyway, Downey's fine in this movie, but definitely is doing some of that actor studio quirky stuff as well.
He seems manic. He had to have been using pretty bad at this point.
He'd been using for most of his life, so why not now?
Yeah, he had a great redemption story. That man had no business coming back and succeeding in Hollywood the way that he did. But he has a one in a zillion charisma about
always
him.
Did.
Yeah, and you see it in this movie, but it's funny. It seems menacing in this movie, which it ought to. But there's something about him where you're like, I wouldn't let you house sit for me, you know?
Yeah, they definitely, you said, taking advantage. And that's one thing, too, that Altman is better about than most white directors ever. Now, this isn't so true, because most people try to be very conscious of the fact that my storyline better have people that aren't white, gay people, trans people. Well, that's not so common, but I bet it's going to be more so as the years go on. Same with this non-binary thing. You're going to have more and more of that in movies, and you're going to get the right wing.
Especially in Los Angeles.
Yeah. And the right-wing people will bitch about it, but that's just America. That's the world as well. But Altman was always good, or at least most of the time good, in his stories about having black people involved in them. Or if he didn't, it's for a reason. I don't think there's that many in McCabe, and there probably wouldn't be in the West. Maybe there could be. Anyway, I don't think there's that many in McCabe. And there aren't that many in this, ironically, because there are in Nashville. Robert Doakey has a pretty important role in Nashville, I believe. He's one of the ones that tries to talk sense to the one that wants to be the next great singer, the one who strips for the guys the night before. He's in this movie very briefly, and so is Michael Beach. Michael Beach and his wife are the ones that are having their house sat for by Downey and Taylor. But after those guys leave early in the story, I don't think we really see anybody else who's not white again in this whole movie.
The hospital, there's the couple, the interracial couple.
That's Robert Doakey.
It's a movie about white people.
Yeah, that's Doakey.
To which I'll say it's 1993. Not saying it's right, but it's not surprising that...
But Altman tended to have black people in his movies.
Right. Some review I read, maybe it was Roger Ebert. Wow, this does not look like the Los Angeles that I know, because Los Angeles is not all white people. There would at least be some Hispanic
Where are the
people.
Hispanics, yeah.
It could be that all of Raymond Carver's stories took place in the Pacific Northwest. But if you're going to change the location to Los Angeles, you could change the color of your characters as well. But Roger Ebert said it kind of plays into the isolation.
Yeah.
When you have all these characters that share something more in common,
Well, some of them are,
then it illustrates their isolation
and
from
some
one
of them
another.
are related to each other, too. So logically then, still mostly now, if you're white, you're going to be related to people who are white.
It's the classic... a city with 20 million people, and yet every single person is really living in their own little isolated bubble. That's very true of these characters, and it doesn't feel melodramatic. It doesn't feel wrought. It feels familiar.
I guess it would probably be in the newspaper, and maybe that's how she'd find out about it. But Lily Tomlin, I don't think, knows that the boy she ran over died. Or if she does know, she can't really follow the story, because she does
It'll be in the newspaper
try.
because the father's famous. He's a D-lister. He's on a news show.
Yeah.
But that is the kind of story that I feel like people would learn about. Does she know that that was his son, though? You would have
Not
to see
at the
a
time,
picture
no.
to make the connection.
And she did try to do something for him, but Casey refused. He walked home. No, leave me alone. Can't talk to strangers.
I don't think I would leave that kid on his own. But the kid kind of makes a case for her to leave.
Yeah, he refuses help.
What is she supposed to do? Creep on this kid and follow him home? Which is clearly making him very uncomfortable, and he's also afraid that he's going to get in trouble. Or does she just take him at his word that he's fine? He's going to go home, he's going to see his parents, and he's going to get taken care of. He looks fine, he's talking full sentences.
Yeah. So I can understand her point of view, but she definitely feels bad about it and does tell Earl.
It's well written in that way.
Mm-hmm. The other what happens next, I guess you could do what happens next for everybody in this movie, but I did one already, which is Jerry's going to kill again. For the baker, Mr. Bitcower, the Lyle Lovett, another singer, Lyle Lovett plays the baker. I do like that arc, that he is a dick because they stood him up with the cake. I'm sure this isn't the only time this has ever happened. For him to be this angry about it, it must happen way too often. but they don't call back for good reason. And then when they go to confront him and he finds out the reason why, it's not like he weeps, but you can see his face, as much as Lyle Lovett can convey emotion like that. He's not really an actor. He's
not a good one.
Yeah, he's got a bigger role actually than the player. As does Fred Ward, who's an important part of the player. He's in this movie, but not a huge part of it. Well, I guess everybody's about equal. But anyway, when Lovett finds out, Mr. Bitcower finds out why they didn't respond, I like that resolution there. But what happens next is, do you think they'll pay for that birthday cake? Because they could easily afford it.
And he works 16 hours a day to make ends meet.
Nobody in this movie is very wealthy, but I think the Finnegans are doing okay.
I think Marion and Ralph are very wealthy.
Okay, they are, yeah.
They have a big, beautiful house. He's a doctor. He's a doctor who lost a patient that day. Although it's funny, he's the one treating the kid that whole time, because that's a connection with them, that he's the kid's doctor.
Right.
But he's not on the scene when the kid dies. He's gone off, he's doing something else, and it's a different doctor who rushes in to try and save him at the last minute. Although you get the impression that it's too late. And you're kind of left wondering, could they have done more? Should they have paid more attention to one thing or another? Could they not have spotted that his head injuries were worse than they initially thought? Did he mess up? Is he a bad doctor? He's definitely kind of smug.
Somebody's got to be at the bottom of their class.
Right, yeah. Somebody's the worst neurosurgeon in Los Angeles. But back to the Lyle Lovett thing that you're talking about. Is that the only story that actually has a catharsis? It's the saddest ending of anyone's story. They lost their little boy, but
these people are making nice.
They're making a connection. You might argue that the two married couples in the hot tub that have been drinking all night, they're making a connection, but I wouldn't say that because they're really just trying to avoid their spouses.
I think you're right. That's the storyline there.
Right, but the saddest story in the whole movie is the only story that seems to have not a happy ending, but a catharsis.
And Jack Lemmon walking off is one of his character's worst things he could ever possibly do. Cheating on his wife and Howard having to deal with that through his whole life is a problem too. And Howard was in a car accident much like Casey was.
Yeah.
But when Jack Lemmon turns and walks away, the look in his face, even though it's a terrible thing to do and he's an asshole for doing it, it's Jack Lemmon, so he plays it really well. And you almost, I did at least, feel bad for him too, because he isn't walking away like, oh, I don't give a shit. It's more like, I can't deal with this. I think that's why he walks away. And that's a shitty thing to do. But he's hurting too. I'm sure he's never going to see his family again, though.
I had a different take.
Okay.
You got to see in real time my reaction to that. As soon as he puts his hat on, I'm like, no, you didn't. I think it totally tracks for his character. I think the only reason he came creeping back into their lives is because he must have wanted something. His timing was bad. Oh, your little boy's in the hospital. Okay, well, you're vulnerable. Their kid is fighting for his life. They are beside themselves.
And all he wants to do is talk about himself.
He just wants to talk about himself. What's wrong with this person? So you know that there's a level of narcissism, or at the very least self-involvement, that is incurable.
So why is the son dying ruin whatever he wants?
Because for him to win whatever he wants, which is probably, let's face it, some kind of money or resources, I don't think he wants companionship or relationship. If that was the case, he would have come crawling back many years ago. And he doesn't seem to express any real interest in them, not even in his grandson. So he must want money. And he sees this scenario where he's like, well, I thought I was just going to have to make nice with this family to get something out of them. But now I'm going to have to deal with this intense level of grief and emotional labor. And I'm just not here for that.
Well,
there's got to be an easier way to make money.
Shitty thing to do, but I think it's because it's a great actor doing it. I felt for him because he's Jack Lemmon.
I really didn't. I just thought that was pure selfishness.
I felt for him and still didn't like him. Let's put it that way.
Oh, sure. Every character.
Which is true in Glenn Ross when he's trying to talk to Kevin Spacey about what's going to happen in the future. I'm going to close for you because he thinks he made this great deal that he didn't actually make. So he broke into the office and stole stuff. But I feel for this guy who has been desperate for so long, and now, as he keeps saying, has his balls back, but everything gets ripped out from under him because of what Spacey tells him about that couple not being able to afford the land. So why were they ever in this in the first place? So he's playing something similar 2 straight years, and 2 movies I love. You don't love the first one, Glengarry. But maybe it's because it's Jack Lemmon. Had Ed Harris played either one of the characters, Harris is in Glengarry, or a number of other actors in this film, I maybe wouldn't be saying this right now. Bruce Davison is not that much younger, I don't think, than Lemmon. He looks like an older guy himself, for that matter. We've never covered him before, by the way. He's been in 270-plus movies. First time we've ever covered a movie of his, though, Bruce Davison. And the top-billed actor is Andy McDowell, and then it's Davison and Lemmon. So they bunch all the families together for the most part. Now, even though I love Frances McDormand, and you do too, and Peter Gallagher, who plays Stormy here, I think separated, not divorced. Anyway, who's one of the pilots who's dumping the poison to get rid of the medfly. So that's the connection with all that. And if you had to pare this down for some reason to 2.5 hours or something, you could probably get rid of their plot.
Agreed.
But the biggest part of it would be when Stormy goes in there and starts chainsawing everything she owns. We never see her reaction to that, but what do you do? Or maybe you do we see her go in the house? Well, anyway, I guess you agree. Don't really need any of these people. Although Gallagher clearly has fun playing this scene where he gets to ruin stuff. And that makes me think that either Carver or Altman was living vicariously through this scene. Because I'm sure one or both of them must have had a bad breakup to have a scene like that in a book, or whatever, a short story, or now a movie.
Whatever she represents, she's the other woman, and she's a bad mom, let's just say, because she is a bad mom. But everything about her that kind of represents that character is also represented in Jennifer Jason Leigh's character. This movie's very concerned with infidelity in one way or another. It's a different kind of infidelity, but you still have a man who feels emasculated. One reacts by destroying everything in her house, and then the other reacts by killing a stranger. Do you need both these stories? They're kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's true. Unless there's an important plot point I'm missing, maybe the most innocent character in this movie, of the adults at least, is Zoe. She didn't really do anything wrong, and she's the one that kills herself, too.
I would also say that Andie MacDowell's character, pretty innocent.
She bungs up pretty bad, though, by not taking the kid to the hospital sooner. Although, I don't know if I would have known to do that.
No. Kid's like, I'm fine, I'm tired. I don't know if everybody would know what to do. And as soon as she realizes something's really wrong, she immediately does the right thing. I don't think that taking him to the hospital a half hour earlier would have saved him. I don't think the movie's implying
It's a blood clot. Can you do anything about a blood clot if you find it sooner? Because he wakes up briefly at the end, too. His eyes flutter, he seems like he's okay, and then passes out and dies.
The blood clot moves, he has an aneurysm or something. There is a little scene when we are introduced to her and her husband, though, where you see that their marriage is not perfect either. They're in perfect alignment through most of the movie, but when we first meet them, he's on TV, and he's like, get in here, you have to see me on TV. And she's like, I'm coming. And she kind of strolls in, and she never really lays eyes on it. She's not paying any attention to the TV, even though he clearly is like, come on, I'm on TV, look at me. So we don't really revisit that part of their relationship, but it's clear that there's also something lacking between the two of them.
Yeah, the couples, every one of them has something going on that's not so good. And it's hard to say if they'll break up or not when this is over, but they might. So Andie MacDowell was in The Player, and I said Groundhog Day the same year as The Player was the year before this. Lemmon was in The Player too. I think both were cameos. His was definitely a cameo. He's only playing the piano in the background. I don't think he even has a line of dialogue. Modine, we covered in Full Metal Jacket a long time ago, his big breakout role. Julianne Moore, you already said, The Big Lebowski, also Far From Heaven, we did that last year. Boogie Nights, we did that last year as well. There's probably others with Moore, but there's those 4 now. Madeline Stowe, I think it's just 12 Monkeys so far, but again, I'll say, what a beauty. Talked about Robbins credits and Archer's credits already. Fred Ward was so key in The Player the year before this. Great long career. He's been in so many, or had been. He's unfortunately died. A lot of great movies he was in, or at least good movies. JJL, we'd never really covered her much until more recent years. The Hateful Eight, of course, the Oscar nomination a couple years ago. Well, quite a few years ago now. That was 2015. And Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where she's the lead, and we covered that last summer. Talked about Penn being in Dogs. Also, he's in Footloose with Laurie Singer. She is Kevin Bacon's girlfriend. Didn't act a lot, though. And she's pretty good in this, I think. Lily Taylor, we never covered her before that I can see, but we probably will do The Conjuring at the end of this year. Well, October, during Scary Movie Month, when it's 10 years old. Talked about Downey. Lily Tomlin was in Nashville. Very important. She's so great in that movie. She has not really a cameo. I think she's playing herself, but she and Scott Glenn have a fairly decently long scene in The Player where they play actors. And she's a voice in a movie we just recently covered, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Tom Waits was in The Fisher King. We covered that a couple years ago. And he was Renfield the year before this in Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. And he's one of the better Renfields anyone's ever been. There have been a lot of Renfields, and of course they had a movie called Renfield recently, which I have not seen yet. But he was great the year before in Dracula.
I agree.
Francis McDormand was in Fargo, The Man Who Wasn't There, and Nomadland. Maybe others, but those for sure. We've covered all of them. Gallagher had been in The Player the year before, but also in Sex, Lies, and Videotape with Andie MacDowell. They're married. That was in 1989, but they don't have any scenes together in this, do they? No, they don't share any screen time. Annie Ross had been in The Player the year before, and Alex Trebek is actually in this movie, and Jeopardy is a running theme because you see the board game that they are playing it, I guess. The two couples do play the Jeopardy board game, and Trebek is annoyed at one point when those two couples are talking during the cello performance that Laurie Singer's putting on. Altman, the director and the writer, with Frank Barhydt, I guess how you say that name, Barhydt. That man did 3 other scripts with Altman, and Altman wrote a lot of his own movies. He directed MASH, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Nashville, and The Player. We've covered all those movies. We've got to do Gosford Park one of these days, probably in a few years. We talked about it being based on Carver's short stories. The producer, Kerry Brokaw, was an executive producer on The Player and did many movies with Mike Nichols. I already said the Criterion DVD is what we watched. It's 2:3:5:1. I think Altman almost always worked in that aspect ratio. Walt Lloyd shot this. He worked with Soderbergh quite a lot. And he also shot a lot of goofy comedies. He's one of those people with this great movie in his resume, and then some good ones, but then a lot of comedies. You think, you want to do that, but maybe they pay well.
I'll say a cinematographer that can shoot comedy is probably good at capturing improv.
That's true.
You got to be loose.
Okay, that's a good point. The editors, Geraldine Perroni, who worked with Altman quite a bit, including on The Player the year before, and I think was nominated for an Oscar for that, and also Brokeback Mountain, she cut that. And Susie Elmiger, E-L-M-I-G-E-R, this was her debut. And the composer, Mark Isham, did 7 movies I covered with Chris on Scoring at the Movies. He did the scores for Point Break, Hardball, Miracle, Invincible, The Express, Warrior, and 42. I'm not sure you and I have ever covered one of his movies, but all those I did with Chris on Scoring at the Movies, and he seems to work with everybody.
The jazz soundtrack mimics that unpredictable rhythm.
And music is a theme in this, because you got 2 people who are musicians, and I already said that a lot of the actors are actually musicians who are either also actors or, like Lyle Lovett, masquerading a little bit as an actor. So we just said the look is pretty great, and the music is good, but what about the cutting?
Yeah, so my editor's heart needs to address the way this film is cut. I think it's such an important component to how and why it works. Perroni also cut The Player. She also came back and cut Ready to Wear with Susie Elmiger again.
Oh. The year after this, then.
The year after this, his next film. But I think they just did those 3 films together. Altman, of course, at this point had plenty of practice putting together these big ensemble stories, and Shortcuts really follows the same style that Nashville had. It follows it very closely. But I think part of the reason that this film, in 3 hours of running time, never drags, despite this really unconventional storytelling style, is that we always leave every scene in the middle of the scene.
Yeah.
You know, you have like 20 different threads of tension going on here that are never resolved and revolving back and forth. Always anxious to see where all these stories are going. The magic trick is that there never is any resolution. Just like in real life, fights carry on, couples pretend nothing happened, and sometimes you get catharsis, sometimes things are worse than when you began, and the story only ends because the credits roll, not the other way around. That's a very Altman thing. He just ends the story, and just like in real life, you just have to accept where you are.
Actually, he has deaths in a lot of his movies at the end, though, and that is the ending. McCabe.
Yeah, I'm thinking McCabe and Mrs. Miller, yeah.
Nashville, of course, the shooting. Although, what's great about that movie is then the uplift of them all singing the song when she's taken off, meaning Ronnie Blakely's taken off.
And that whole film does revolve around a music festival that is coming to an end as well. So, yeah, you're right. This movie is kind of an exception. And maybe that comes from Carver's writing, or maybe that's just something he wanted to do with this movie, that life doesn't end. Movies only end because you decide to end them. That's just where you decide to stop telling the story. But instead of feeling unsatisfied, I feel like I had been gifted this beautiful insight. This is going to sound corny, but there's something about what this film says about human nature. Even though these are humans at their worst, it just makes me feel a little more understood.
Yeah, well, Altman was great at that. I don't think they're all at their worst.
No, I guess that's fair. They're not all at their worst. But the way the story is told, and this is just not easy to do. This is why I want to give credit to the editors, because this is a magic trick. I don't know how people pull this off. You have to have such an incredible instinct for storytelling, to get the timing right, to get the order right, to get the balance right between all these characters and all these different stories, and to know when to cut and know when to come back to things.
And to balance this many people.
The balance. I can't imagine how they did it. It feels incredible to me. So that's why I can't shut up about it now.
If you're going to improv as well as much as he does in his films and have this many characters, there's no way you're doing what apparently Hitchcock's movies were, which is you cut off the head and the tail of the take and you're done. So it was never that easy, I'm sure, anyway, with Hitchcock either.
Yeah, that gives me an opportunity to talk about editing when you're dealing with a film that's largely improv. There's a reason why Christopher Guest movies are better than Judd Apatow movies, and I think that is because Christopher Guest knows how to kill his darlings.
Yeah.
I think that he truly has a better understanding of what he can do without. Whereas Apatow is just in love. These are his friends. They're so funny. Oh, I can't cut that out. Are you kidding? It's such a great day on set. The audience is going to love it. But then your movie is 2.5 hours long.
Or at least
it's
2.
just too long for a comedy. Everybody will agree that the biggest flaw with Apatow movies is they're just too shaggy. They're just too long. They're bloated. They go on and on.
This doesn't feel bloated, though, despite the fact it's 3 hours.
It doesn't, even though it's 3
and 8
hours.
minutes.
Yeah. And it's improv, but there's just such a gift there for seeing, if you're just going to let the camera roll, you're going to be on set and you're going to end the day with 40 minutes of footage. Somebody has to cut that down to 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And that means leaving 39 minutes and 30 seconds of film on the cutting room floor, and you have to be able to say goodbye to it. This is something that Altman clearly does well.
I think he also said one thing about probably the most important thing a director can do is cast. So if you find the right actors, and usually great actors in his case, you're not letting them fuck around too much.
Right actors, great actors, and Lyle Lovett.
Yeah, right.
He's just such a weak link in an otherwise incredible cast. He must be the coolest fucking guy in Hollywood.
To have almost married, or did marry, right? Julia Roberts?
He married Julia Roberts at her peak.
Around this time.
And looking like he looks. Not like he's an uggo or something, but Julia Roberts. And he's in Robert Altman movies. He's in David Lynch movies, despite the fact that this man cannot act.
Yeah. Okay, then. Last thoughts on great film, Shortcuts.
I'm so glad we're talking about this movie. Altman created this incredible, unique, unsentimental work of art about the human experience.
It may not be his last great film, because Gosford Park was pretty awesome, and I liked A Prairie Home Companion as well.
Agreed.
This is maybe his last truly big, capital letter G, great film. Gosford Park's not conversation.
It's in this top 5. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
It sounds like it's not that generous, but considering the man made a lot of movies.
Nashville, still my favorite of his films. We took a break about halfway into the screening and agreed this is a goddamn good movie. I think I literally said that to you in the kitchen. And it's even better than just goddamn good. It is awesome. It's a great film. As far as weaving a huge cast of characters into each other's orbit, it's probably only second to Nashville. But like I said, that has a reason to be in Nashville. And this doesn't have a reason for them to connect. And he still makes, if not all, almost all of them make a hell of a lot of sense. And some of them you go, oh, Lily is Lily's daughter. I didn't know that was going to happen. That was, I think, an hour and a half into the film. It's a hell of an achievement, and it should have got more than just the Best Director nomination, although I go Best Picture would have been a logical choice, and the screenplay probably should have been up for the award. Yeah, great film. Shortcuts.
He's always been a little too offbeat to really be considered one of the greats at the Oscars. People love him, but he's never broken into mainstream.
Well, he's long dead now, so he's not going to do it now.
No.
He was nominated a lot, including for Gosford Park. I think it was the last time he was nominated, and he got the honorary award the year he did, Prairie Home Companion, so he wasn't hated either. Okay, in 4 days it will be Friday the 30th, and I will end the month of S by talking on my own about the glorious comic book movie that pretty much started all this cinematic superhero stuff a long time ago, Dick Donner's Superman. Who is it, Superman? Lex Luthor. The world is safe again, Superman. Thanks to you. I'm going to be saying that for days and days, because I watched the movie.
You've already been saying it.
I just watched it yesterday afternoon. And in that podcast, I'll be saying it for sure, too, but I'll be on my own. In 7 days, it will be one day before the 4th of July. So Bev and I will cover a 25-year-old USA, USA flag waver, Armageddon. And it's an ironic choice a week after Shortcuts, because that's nothing like an Altman film, and I'm pretty sure Bob hated movies like Armageddon, actually. So the coming attractions trivia for Armageddon. Billy Bob Thornton and Ben Affleck had won Oscars for screenwriting in 2 consecutive years. Thornton should have worked with Altman. He would have been a good choice there, I think. Thornton in one of these movies. So they won Oscars in 2 straight years, 96 and 97, for Sling Blade and Good Will Hunting. Then they both acted in Armageddon in 1998 together. One other major cast member in Armageddon was also nominated for a screenwriting Oscar, although in that person's case it hadn't happened yet. Who?
All right, so for the answers to that question, check out next week's podcast about Armageddon. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. Or you can reach us by email. Have you ever seen podcast@gmail.com. You can find our podcast plus bonus material on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
Before we go, I have to point out the irony that a movie called Shortcuts is 3 hours and 8 minutes long.
And cut.